Hello and welcome to CB8 Speaks, the monthly program about issues of interest to New York City and Community Board 8 in Manhattan. Community Board 8 covers the Upper East Side from 59th Street to 96th Street, 5th Avenue to the East River, and Roosevelt Island. My name is Billy Freeland. I'm a member of Community Board 8, a secretary on the board, and co-chair of our Charter Revision Committee. And I'm really thrilled about our guest today. Sam Schwartz, affectionately known as Gridlock Sam, is one of the leading experts on transportation and the future of cities in this country. Sam is formerly the New York City Traffic Commissioner, also was chief engineer in the Department of Transportation. He now has his own engineering firm. And Sam is the author of two books, most recently, Street Smart, The Rise of Cities and the Fall of Cars, and No One at the Wheel, Driverless Cars and the Road of the Future. Sam joins us now for a discussion of the future of cities, public transit, and more. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Billy.
So I have to start, Sam, with the nickname, Gridlock Sam Schwartz. If my nickname were Gridlock, I would think that were a negative. Tell us, how'd you get that nickname?
I started working for the traffic department in New York City in 1971. One of the first plans we were working on was something called the Red Zone, banning cars from Manhattan. And we tried to figure out what the impact would be on the grid of Manhattan. And we soon talked about an intersection locking up in two intersections. And we began throwing around the words, not one word, gridlock. And the word was just being used by a few traffic engineers. In 1980, I put it into a transit strike plan. And there was gridlock, two words, the gridlock prevention plan. The transit strike hit on April 1, 1980. The media immediately heard about this thing, gridlock. It became one word, and soon the word has stuck with me, and it's been with me for almost 40 years now.
Oh, that's an incredible story. I had no idea that was the origin of the term until just now. Well, Sam, you mentioned a little bit about your career. Tell us, you started, I believe, in 1971, if I have that right, in the Department of, what is now the Department of Transportation, and you ended up having a career in New York City Transit about 20 years or so until the early 90s. Tell us, when you look at New York's issues today, both traffic congestion and public transit, and compare it to when you were active in government, what's the same and what's changed?
A lot of things have changed, but there are some things that it's kind of like a cycle and we're back in the same place. The subway system in 1971 was really crumbling. People were abandoning the city in large numbers, but we had a very innovative, creative mayor, John Lindsay. And John Lindsay started many of the things that we're seeing today in transportation. He closed off Fulton Street in Brooklyn and made it a busway. What are they talking about today? 14th Street making it into a busway. He proposed Times Square become a pedestrian mall. What happened? Times Square became a pedestrian mall. He proposed congestion pricing, putting tolls on the Eastern Harlem River bridges. We now have tolls on the Eastern Harlem River bridges. So he was very prescient. He was way ahead of his time. It came off the environmental movement, the 60s movement, the Woodstock generation, all of that together, and I was a member of all of that. I was thrilled to be working for John Lindsay, even though he didn't know me. I was a peon in the old traffic department. But in the traffic department, I felt like a spy because I was interested in improving transit in the city of New York, and these guys were still talking about building freeways and expressways. We had a road called Westway, which would have been a 6-lane buried expressway under Manhattan from 42nd Street down to the Battery Tunnel. We were widening the Long Island Expressway. We were looking at a cross Manhattan expressway, a lower Manhattan expressway, resurrecting some Robert Moses plans. I came in just at the end of Moses' career. So some things were still on the books. Now, we are not highway oriented at all in New York City. No one is proposing new highways. Nobody is proposing additional car capacity. And what we've seen this decade is extraordinary. We've never seen as rapid change in the past 10 years as we have since, say, the advent of the automobile, since the Model T by Henry Ford in 1908. And we've got the beginning of this decade, Uber and Lyft and Via and Git and Juno. Then we had bike share, and now we have moped share, and we have scooter share, and we have e-bikes, and so many others that are coming on the street system. This is the craziest it's been in a long time. 50 years ago, bikes were either toys or some delivery people. I was a delivery boy in Brooklyn. That was about it for bikes.
That's really interesting, and it sounds like in a lot of that there are many positives, but clearly New York City has its share of challenges. We have buses that, according to the controller, are averaging 7.4 miles per hour, and just recently Governor Cuomo declared a state of emergency in the New York City subway system. So how would you describe the challenges that New York is facing today?
What we saw for the first time with both systems going under at the same time, hitting a crisis, meaning below ground. The subway system got better from when I started in '71. It reached its nadir around 1980, and then Dick Ravitch came along and came with a rescue plan for the subways. It got better and better and better until about 2010, and then we began to see the effects of a budget cut on basic maintenance. So in 2010, the subways were running about 90% on time. By 2017, they were running 63% on time. That's a real crisis. Even 90% would be lousier than all of the best systems in the world, who were running at 97 and 98 and 99. But we were happy with 90%. And if you looked at speeds on the streets, which never varied tremendously, suddenly went from about 7 miles an hour to 6.5 at the beginning of the decade, down to 4.7 miles an hour in Midtown Manhattan, and they're still on their way down. So 2017, a crisis hit. People are screaming about the subways, and people are screaming above ground like a scene out of Network. I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. Both of those come together. The governor, reading the signals, supports congestion pricing, and the legislature does, and finally we get congestion pricing passed.
You mentioned that Mayor John Lindsay supported a form of congestion pricing, and that the state legislature in their budget this year passed a version of congestion pricing. So if you could describe for our viewers, what exactly is congestion pricing, and what does it look like in the version that the state has now embraced?
So the concept of congestion pricing was invented here at Columbia University. William Vickery, a Columbia University professor who used to pester me when I was a city official to implement congestion pricing, and I tried a couple of times. I had no idea he'd go on to win the Nobel Prize in economics. But congestion pricing means assigning a value to space. And space in Midtown, if you were in a building, you'd pay a fortune for that space. And it means that if you're in a car, you're occupying 6 feet by 20 feet, you've got 120 square feet, that you should be paying for that. And during the most congested times, you should be paying more, just as we do when we buy airline tickets or hotel tickets. And he likened it to all of that. So that's the concept of congestion pricing, that it shouldn't just be everybody drives when they want to for free. Otherwise, we see the speeds that we're seeing today of 4 to 5 miles an hour on average in Midtown, and on their way down. So the New York City plan has two elements to it. One which was passed and implemented in February of 2019, and that was a congestion charge for Uber, Lyft, Via, Juno, Get, the yellow taxis, the green taxis. Any of these vehicles, if they set tire below 96th Street and pick up a fare, that fare, if it's an Uber or a Lyft, it's $2.75 instantly, even if it's moving 1 block in the area. A yellow taxi, $2.50, a green taxi, $2.75, a Via, which is shared vehicles, 75 cents for each passenger in it. That went into effect in February. What the legislature just passed in the budget that you referred to was a congestion pricing zone of Manhattan south of 60th Street. So imagine drawing a line across 60th Street, just at the southern end of Central Park. Every entry into that area will be charged. Now, we don't know if it's going to be going in and going out, but right now, everybody coming in will be charged. Now, there are two escape routes that the legislature put in there. One is the FDR Drive, if you're going through and come out the Brooklyn Bridge. So let's say you're on the Upper east side, you're in Board 8 and you get on at 79th Street, you can take the FDR Drive all the way to the Brooklyn Bridge and go to Brooklyn and not pay a toll. Same thing in the reverse direction. If you're on the west side and you take the West Side Highway down to the Battery Tunnel, you won't have to pay either. So the two escape routes. Other than that, everybody has to pay. Now, how much do they have to pay? That's what you're wondering. Nobody knows. So in the legislation, it says that they must raise $1 billion net for transit. And that could be translated into a 15-to-1 ratio for bonds, $15 billion. So the goal is, how do we collect $1 billion net every year? And here's where the legislature and the governor and the mayor and everybody punted. They said, okay, we know what the big number is that we want to get, but we're not going to decide on what each person has to pay until after the next election. Then we'll let you know. Conveniently, it's just a coincidence that we will know in November of 2020, November 15th, thereabouts, what it will be. There'll be a 6-person panel that will be hearing about this and deciding these. Hopefully they'll have public hearings and get a lot of public input. That's when we'll know what the rates are. But I would not be surprised, in order to raise $1 billion, and I've looked at these numbers, that at times you'll have to pay more than $10, somewhere between $10 and $15 if it's a one-way charge coming in. If it's a two-way charge, it may be $7 to $8 each way that you might have to pay to come into the Central Business District, Manhattan, south of 60th Street.
So clearly a lot to be determined by this panel. Sam, you famously wrote a report in 2013, the Move New York report, that proposed a form of congestion pricing. And as you were just describing, this is an issue you've been thinking about your whole career. So if Sam Schwartz were on this panel or advising Governor Cuomo, what are your 2 or 3 things you think the panel must keep in mind, whether it be on pricing, whether it be on whether any exceptions should apply to drivers on New York City streets, and what are the 1 or 2 pitfalls to avoid?
Well, I'm hoping not to be selected for the panel. A lot of people think I already am. I was on the last 2 governors' panels on looking at congestion pricing. But I'd be a hardliner with exemptions. Already some exemptions are listed, people with low incomes that live in the district, incomes below $60,000. But I wonder if income is the right way to take a look at it, because I know someone who lives at 5th and 56th Street and reports on his taxes 0. So does that mean he gets that kind of an exemption? I think he's not in Board 8, he's in Board 6 on that. So a lot of wealthy people really don't report income. So I don't know if they did that the right way. But if you make less than $60,000, you're eligible for an exemption. People with disabilities are eligible for exemptions. And there are a few others that a lot of elected officials are looking at. In fact, I was speaking to someone at the MTA that said they already received requests for more than 30 exemptions. The firefighters have asked for exemptions for their personal cars, the police for their personal cars, teachers for their personal cars, transit workers for their personal cars. People from New Jersey have asked for exemptions. The governor of New Jersey has asked for an exemption. And I can go on and on. Anytime there's an exemption, if you have a target of $1 billion, it means somebody else keeps paying more and more and more. And why the exemptions? We have 15 toll facilities in New York City already. We have 9 Tri-Bar Bridge and Tunnel, or MTA bridges and tunnels, and the same thing, 6 Port Authority facilities. We have lived now for 100 years without any exemptions on these facilities. Why start now? It's a slippery slope.
And are there any exemptions that Sam Schwartz thinks might be appropriate? One of the most common you hear is an emergency responder. If someone's responding to an emergency, they shouldn't have to face the congestion charge. What do you say? Yeah,
of course, emergency responders, everybody agrees. But the only exemption that I would like to see are for veterans of Woodstock 69.
They've been going through a lot recently.
Right, we've been suffering a good deal.
So congestion pricing, it's not just about cars on the streets. It's also about our buses and subways and the MTA. Tell us a little bit about what congestion pricing will mean for subways and buses. And we've spoken a lot about Manhattan, but what will it also mean for people who live in the other boroughs of New York City?
A really wonderful thing happened that also, I should have mentioned, helped congestion pricing get passed, and that was having a plan, finally. Andy Byford came along, and he's now head of the subways and buses, came up with a plan called Fast Forward, and you've got a blueprint. Everybody can look at the MTA site and see what is going to be done. He's making subways more accessible. He'd love to do every single subway station. He's going to improve bus service and increase bus service and more bus rapid transit. He is speeding up the subway service through taking 1920s technology for signals and making them modern on that. And he really takes it very seriously. Under Andy Byford and with the mayor and the governor's additional funds that they put in, $850 million, and with the new revenue that we've got from Uber and Lyft and others, we're seeing a difference. We went from 63% on-time performance in 2017 to the most recent on-time performance of being around 80%. 80% is really lousy, but it's not as lousy as where we were. We were in chaos at 63%. Now it's just lousy.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Upper East Side. We are an Upper East Side-based program. What would your message be to Upper East Siders who have doubts or questions about congestion pricing, and specifically, what will congestion pricing mean for Community Board 8 from 59th Street to 96th Street?
There is no community that does better with congestion pricing in terms of freeing up traffic congestion, cleaning the air, increasing safety than the two communities on either side of the Queensboro-Ed Koch Bridge. Why is that? There is no bridge in the world, river crossing in the world, that is sandwiched so closely between two toll crossings. There's the Queensboro Bridge. Just to the south is the Queens Midtown Tunnel. Round trip, $12.24. To the north is the Triborough RFK Bridge, $12.44. Smack in the middle is the Queensboro Bridge, $0. So every day, if you were in a helicopter and you're looking over the LIE, you would watch everybody driving from all the way out Long Island, Suffolk, Nassau, Queens, coming right to the Midtown Tunnel and then getting off at Van Dam, taking the Queensboro Bridge. You would see the people on the Grand Central Parkway, all the way from the northern state, all the way out, and coming down Crescent Street and taking the Queensboro Bridge. I did a study years ago. Some communities around the Queensboro Bridge asked me to take a look at it, and I concluded between 30 and 40,000 fewer vehicles every single day would be using the Queensboro Bridge. So people in Community Board 8 should be delighted. Yet rarely do I meet anyone anywhere, not just in Board 8, that says, I'm really delighted with congestion pricing.
Well, we'll stay tuned. It sounds like we'll know a lot more about congestion pricing in a year or more, and we'll stay tuned to see whether, Sam, you end up on that panel. But I do want to shift gears a little bit to the New York City bus system. Another pivotal part of our roads and congestion, but the buses are, to many observers, in a state of disarray. You have, as I mentioned earlier, the controller's report saying buses are averaging 7.4 miles per hour. Here in Community Board 8, the buses that drive along Lexington Avenue in the afternoon hours are averaging 3.9 miles per hour. For most people, they might as well walk. We may have an image of a recent DOT proposal to show our viewers where they're proposing an offset bus lane on Lexington Avenue in order to speed up the buses. This proposal involves taking the bus lane from the furthest right lane to the lane just to the left of that right lane. What effect will proposals like these, others around the city, on reimagining our bus network, what effect do you think they'll have on the New York City transportation system?
Lexington is such a tough one. It's a narrow roadway. It's got narrow sidewalks. I remember many years ago, Holly White wanted me to ban parking from both sides. I think that the city proposal, which I think is a good idea, but I believe you should really look at banning parking from one side of Lexington Avenue if you're going to do it, because it's going to be very hard to squeeze the remaining 2 lanes. Remember, you're going to have a curb lane that's used for parking, you're going to have a bus lane, then you'll have 2 moving lanes, and then you'll have parking. With that parking lane, you can be sure there'll be double parking, meaning you'll be down to 1 lane for the rest of the traffic on Lexington Avenue. I think the city should, I think it's a good idea, but the city should seriously look at banning parking on the opposite side of Lexington Avenue. This would be the east side of Lexington Avenue. It's a tough one, but First and Second Avenue, where the city implemented bus rapid transit years ago, the speeds are much better than they were before they implemented it. And others, Madison Avenue, the double bus lane, that's terrific. Must say I implemented that 40 years ago, but that works perfectly well. And there are a number of others on the west side. Lex is just so narrow that it's one of the tougher ones to do. I wish the city every success, good try, look at banning the parking on the other side of the street.
And is Sam Schwartz an optimist about banning parking on the street?
I hope so, but it's such a complicated issue. I do consulting work as well, and I did consulting for a major hospital, and at the major hospital I showed pictures of emergency vehicles to the pediatric emergency room stuck behind vehicles that were parked and double parked. And even then, the local community, the local council member, fought on removing 3 or 4 parking spaces. So I'm not so optimistic they'll be able to do it here, but do it. I did it. It was different then. There was a traffic commissioner in the old days, and I had traffic enforcement under me, towing, ticket writing. That doesn't exist anymore. There is no one person responsible for traffic in the city. So somehow we've got to figure out a way that somebody is responsible for moving traffic.
Another way people get around the city is cycling. We are seeing an increase in cyclists in New York City at a time when other modes of transportation are seeing declining ridership. Recently, Mayor de Blasio has proposed, I believe he called it the Green Wave. He'd like to see an increase of 30 miles of protected bike lane every year. Corey Johnson, the City Council Speaker, has one-upped that, calling for 50 miles of protected bike lane. And Councilmember Yananis Rodriguez of Northern Manhattan is calling for 100 miles protected bike lane. Sam, what role should bike lanes play in the future of New York transit? And what is your advice to policymakers as they deal with what turns out to be a really contentious issue in communities?
It's a very contentious issue, and I don't think I can ever go to a community board meeting, especially in Manhattan, and Board 8 without people complaining about the bike riders, saying they've got bike lanes, but they don't stop at the light and they go the wrong direction. One of the things is to look at it historically, and that's what I did in my book, Street Smart. Remember what we were 100, 120 years ago. Sidewalks were wide, people walked wherever they wanted to go, and then along came the automobile, and the lobby and the belief of the modernists that a modern city was an auto city began to take away the space from pedestrians. Park Avenue at one time was a park. If you look at pictures of Park Avenue in 1920, there was a wonderful center island park there, wide with just 2 little carriageways on the end. What did we do? We put 4 lanes of traffic on one side, 4 lanes on the other when we have a skinny little mall, and we're happy with that. So if we go back in time, we see that we lost a lot of roadway space that was for bicycles, that was for people walking. And now with so many modes of transportation, we're going to need more, not just bike lanes. It'll be, light travel modes that will be able to use these lanes. But we're getting to the point that we have so many bike riders out there, and that's good, that we bike riders, drivers, everybody is start obeying the rules and regulations. But we need to change the rules and regulations for bike riders. They're not cars. So the rules shouldn't be identical to cars. The fines should not be identical to cars. But nonetheless, we need to enforce the rules for cars and for bikes. I'm not for enforcing the rules against pedestrians. The New York pedestrian can cross wherever they want, and I believe that the chaos that they create actually increases safety to some extent. Los Angeles, which cracks down on jaywalking, has far fewer pedestrians, and more pedestrians get killed in Los Angeles than in New York City. So New York City drivers, I think, are a little more careful. Nonetheless, too many are dying on our roads. We have to slow down. We have to be going at 10, 15 miles an hour when we're in the densest parts of the city, no faster than that.
Do you find that the protected bike lanes reduce conflicts and therefore maybe even reduce congestion on the street? One thing I've noticed is that when you don't have a bike lane, cyclists are weaving in and out of traffic, cars are stopping and starting. But once you have a protected bike lane, more often than not, cyclists are taking that lane and cars don't have to worry about colliding with them as much. Has that reduced congestion in the city and reduced traffic conflict?
It's an interesting observation. When I implemented Madison Avenue and took 2 lanes out of 5 on Madison Avenue and made it a busway and eliminated the turns, the other traffic moved better. Not the people who couldn't make the turn, they weren't happy, but the other traffic moved better. So there is something about establishing an order, putting all the bikes in one lane rather than having them in other areas. Nonetheless, it means fewer lanes. Fewer lanes means less capacity, but also means increased safety, because now there's usually an island with a protected lane. A pedestrian no longer is exposed to as many car lanes as exposed to a bicycle lane, which seems to generate more anger than anything else. But I don't think we're doing a good enough job with enforcement. I believe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have your bike lanes and move traffic too. We've got to get serious about placards. You keep hearing lip service to it, but yet I see so many placards, so many illegal placards, legal placards, ignoring the rules and regulations. Years ago, it was a separate enforcement department, apart from the police department, that did enforcement, that did traffic enforcement, parking enforcement. And they took it seriously and ticketed their fellow government workers and towed their fellow government workers, often in my direction. We need that kind of enforcement. We need to apply science to traffic. Today I was coming down the Henry Hudson Parkway, seeing a car towed from the Bronx. Chances are that car wasn't causing congestion. Maybe it was alternate side parking. You have to put the tow trucks in the middle of Manhattan. It's harder to find a car to tow. Don't count the number of cars you've towed. Don't count the number of tickets that you've written. Instead, see how clear those lanes that are supposed to be cleared, the bus lanes, the no standing zones, how clear they are. And you could have bike lanes, you could have bus lanes, and the traffic can move reasonably well as well.
We could probably do a whole episode on this topic. I do have one more question about it, which is, it is somewhat remarkable how much space on our streets is devoted to parking, and not just parking, but free parking. And some council members have begun to propose residential parking permits, which would essentially say, look, if you live in the area, you can park on the street. Maybe you pay a little bit every year, but the parking shouldn't be entirely free, and it shouldn't be a situation where people who neither live nor work in the neighborhood and are maybe just visiting park on valuable street space. What do you think about that debate? Is residential parking permits, is that something that's realistic, and would it change, how much would it change New York streets?
Well, I have a bad taste in my mouth for residential parking permits based on many, many years ago when it was first raised to me when I was traffic commissioner. It was largely communities of white citizens, white communities that wanted to keep in Brooklyn blacks and Latinos and others from parking on their streets and then using those streets to take the subway. And I lived in one of those neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And so I saw a racial component to it. These are everybody's streets, but everybody should pay. I'm not totally against residential parking permits, because since then there's been some communities where they have worked well, but nonetheless, I think we should not have any free parking in the city of New York. You should have to pay. This is such valuable space. It wasn't conceived that way. When the car first came up, parking was illegal on street. And not only did we allow it, But on the Upper East, on the Upper West Side, we allow double parking on street cleaning days. That's crazy. But it's now become a habit. God forbid somebody goes in and tickets a double parked car, the community will be in an uproar.
One question that maybe we'll touch on all these topics, going back to how the MTA has such a role in congestion pricing, and we know the MTA, which is effectively controlled by the state, controls the subways and buses. Speaker Corey Johnson of the City Council has proposed municipal control of the MTA. Is that a good idea?
I don't think so. I think transportation is regional. And the MTA is now making an attempt for the first time to treat the MTA as a regional transportation agency. I would love to see it become more regional and include New Jersey in it. It's silly now that our MetroCard doesn't work fully in the PATH system and others. They don't accept senior cards, I should say. They do accept the general MetroCard. But we are a region, and the Long Island Railroad and Metro North should be integrated with the subway system. We should be using some Metro North and Long Island Railroad stations, especially within the city, for people to be able to use at a lower price, but full integration of all the systems. Transportation doesn't end right at the Nassau border or right at the border of Westchester and not at the Hudson River. So I'd love to see a more regional approach. The Regional Plan Association has put together a plan for the long term for New York City. That's an excellent plan that recognizes that we are a region from Connecticut to New Jersey to all the 5 boroughs out to Long Island, and we have to deal with it as if we are one.
One final question, Sam. What would you like to see New York City and New York City Transit look like 50 years from now?
I wish they would have a building program, a capital program that they had from 1900 to 1940, 1950. Wow, that was amazing. I don't see it. I really wish 2nd Avenue subway would be completed. I hope we have lines out to the airports, direct lines to the airports. But I'm not so hopeful of that. But what I've noticed is younger people are using other forms of transportation. They like to incorporate physical activity with their day. So why don't we do what a number of other places are doing and build pedestrian and bike bridges? One that goes from Brooklyn to Governor's Island to Lower Manhattan, another one that goes from Long Island City to the Cornell Technion campus at Roosevelt Island, Board 8, and right into Board 8. There's a little platform that we had built years ago for the FDR Drive that's just piles right now. I'd like to see another one, a pedestrian bike bridge from Jersey City or from Hoboken. The last bridge we have built to Manhattan, to the Central Business District, was the Manhattan Bridge, opened on December 31st, 1909. It's time to build more bridges in our city.
Great. Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us on CB8 Speaks. And thank you to our viewers. Really appreciate the time you've taken to join this conversation about the future of cities and the future of New York City public transit. I'll remind you, each month we have an episode of CB8 Speaks. So I hope you'll join us next time. Until then, have a great day. Good night. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So the prospects, your last answer, the prospects of that capital investment, what's that going to take? Do we have the money for that at the state level? Is it going to take some federal assistance?
It would take federal assistance. If we were really concerned about climate change, we would invest in climate